Imagine being forced to play a game where the rules change by the minute. The prize is your life, and the bomb padlocked to your neck is a ticking clock you can't even see. Buckle up, friend, because today we are walking you through a story that feels less like a true crime file and more like a twisted psychological thriller. It involves a bizarre bank robbery, a deadly scavenger hunt, a real-life jigsaw trap, and a group of highly intelligent, utterly broken minds pulling the strings. This was a first-of-its-kind case, so unhinged that it reached the major case level with the FBI, a designation reserved for the worst of the worst. Now, to put that into perspective, there had only been 202 major case files in the previous century of FBI history. I mean, think 9/11 or the anthrax bioweapons attacks. Cases that call for absolute all-hands-on-deck mobilization. This was one of those cases, officially labeled Major Case Number 203, codename COLLARBOMB.
It's a humid summer afternoon on August 28, 2003 in Erie, Pennsylvania, a quiet blue-collar town sitting right on the edge of Lake Erie. Shortly before 2:30 p.m., a man walks into the PNC Bank on Plead Street. He's holding what looks like a clumsy, weirdly shaped cane, and there is a massive boxy bulge hidden right under his extra-large t-shirt. That man is 46-year-old Brian Wells. Now, if you asked anyone who knew him, they tell you that he was quiet, mild-mannered, and completely harmless. He lived alone, loved his cats, and had spent the last 10 years working as a delivery guy for Mamma Mia's Pizzeria. He's the absolute last person on earth that you would expect to stick up a bank. Brian walks past security guards, stands patiently in the teller line, and waits his turn. Now, when he reaches the counter, he slides a note across the glass. It reads, "Gather employees with access to vault keys and work fast. You have 15 minutes to exit with $250,000 in a bag. This bomb is booby-trapped. Any wrong move and you will die." As the teller reads the words, Brian calmly lifts his shirt and the teller's heart drops. Strapped tightly around his neck is a massive metallic collar mechanism. Panic sets in, but the teller tries to stay logical. "Look, the main vault has a time lock. I literally cannot open it. I can only give you what is right here in my drawer." Brian doesn't scream, he doesn't panic, he doesn't take any hostages. He just says, "Okay." The teller stuffs everything that she has into a bank bag, totaling exactly $8,702. Nowhere near the $250,000 demanded. Brian takes the cash, reaches over to grab a sucker from the lollipop jar on the counter, and casually leaves.
To understand how Brian ended up here with a bomb padlocked around his neck, we have to rewind the clock just 40 minutes. At around 1:50 p.m., the phone rings at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria. The call is coming from a payphone at a nearby gas station. A voice on the other end orders 2 large pepperoni pizzas, giving a delivery address that should have been a red flag. A remote, unpaved gravel road winding up toward a massive television transmission tower, sitting on the outskirts of town. Brian climbs into his Geo Metro and drives out of the city. As the asphalt turns to dirt, the woods close in around him. There are no houses out here and no witnesses. It's just gravel, thick brush, and towering radio antennas. When Brian steps out of his car, he thinks he's just making a routine drop-off. But as he walked into the clearing under the towers, he is ambushed. Brian fights back desperately, but he is outnumbered and overpowered. They pin him down, and in a matter of seconds, they snap a heavy, hinged iron collar around his neck and drape an oversized t-shirt over his head to hide the boxing mechanism and shove a crude homemade shotgun into his hands. Before they send him on his way, they hand him a multi-page packet of stenciled notes. The countdown has already begun. If he wants the keys to remove the bomb, he has to play their game and follow the instructions to the absolute T.
After leaving PNC Bank, Brian gets back into his Geo Metro and drives away. But the teller had already hit the silent alarm. Within 15 minutes, Pennsylvania state troopers spot Brian's car pulling into a dirt lot next to an eyeglass world just down the road. They box him in. They get out their cruisers, draw their weapons, and shout for him to step out of the vehicle with his hands up. Brian complies. He gets out, but instead of running or fighting, he immediately drops to his knees on the hot asphalt. And that is when the troopers see the bulge under his shirt clearly. He's wearing an oversized white t-shirt with "Guess" written across the front. Underneath it, clamped tightly around his throat, is a giant heavy iron collar. And it's making a sound. A loud, steady, mechanical tick, tick, tick. This is where the scene becomes deeply unsettling. Brian is sitting cross-legged on the pavement, completely surrounded by police who are hiding behind their open car doors with their weapons aimed right at him. News cameras arrive. They start broadcasting this live to the entire country. And Brian is shouting to the officers, "This is going to go off. I'm not lying. It's on a timer. Why is nobody trying to get this thing off me?" He starts explaining to the police what happened. He says, "Look, I went to deliver a pizza to a remote area by the transmission towers on Peach Street. When I got there, a group of guys jumped me. They put a gun to my head, forced this thing around my neck, and handed me a set of written instructions." He tells them it's a scavenger hunt. The notes told him he had to rob the bank, then follow a map to find hidden keys and codes across the city. Each code would buy him more time, and the final key would unlock the collar. He literally tells the police, "I don't have much time. I need to get to the next stop or I'm going to die." But the police can't let him leave. Protocol dictates they treat him as a hostile threat with a live explosive. They call the bomb squad, but it's 2003 and the nearest technicians are based miles away out of town. As the minutes tick by, police frantically scramble to lock down the area, blocking off major intersections and shutting down roads for public safety. But that shutdown creates a nightmare gridlock. Traffic completely backs up for miles, making it even harder for the incoming bomb squad to cut through the city and reach the scene. On the asphalt, Brian is sweating and pleading, asking the officers to just call his boss at the pizza shop to verify who he is. Then, around 3:18 p.m., exactly 50 minutes after he walked into the bank, the collar suddenly shifts from ticking to a loud, rapid electronic beeping sound. Brian leans forward slightly, and then, boom. Right there on live television, the device detonates. The blast rips a massive hole in Brian Wells's chest. He falls backward onto the pavement. 3 minutes later, the bomb squad finally pulls into the parking lot. But it's too late. Brian Wells is gone.
The explosion killed Brian instantly, but the nightmare for his family didn't end there. Because the custom iron collar bomb was locked with multiple padlocks and held crucial forensic data, investigators couldn't easily pry it open. To preserve the evidence and the triggering mechanisms intact for the FBI crime lab, authorities decided to decapitate Brian's body right there at the crime scene to remove the device. And when investigators finally examine the mechanism, they are shocked by what they uncover. At first glance, the collar looked like a sophisticated piece of military tech, utilizing a heavy double handcuff latching mechanism that made it physically impossible to slide off his head. But when the FBI lab cut into the iron box housing the electronics, they discovered a chilling reality. The device was a gruesome masterpiece of low-tech engineering. The explosive payload wasn't advanced military C4, it was just ordinary black powder scraped out of shotgun shells and packed into basic pipes. Even the brain of the device was ancient technology, nothing more than off-the-shelf manual wind-up kitchen egg timers. But the bomb maker was a master of psychological manipulation. He designed the device to look incredibly complex, just to terrify anyone trying to disarm it, packing the casing with a chaotic web of red herrings. There were completely meaningless decoy wires running to dead ends, fake connection points, and non-functional switches. He even glued a toy cell phone to the top of the box to trick the police into thinking that the bomb could be detonated remotely by a phone call. It couldn't. It was all a massive bluff to buy time and force any bomb technician into a lethal guessing game. And if this wasn't cruel enough, the mechanics of those kitchen timers were purposefully rigged to trap him. The bomb maker had drilled holes into the casings and inserted metal pins to act as manual stops. And when they ambushed Brian in the woods, they pulled the first pin to let the mechanical gears start grinding down towards zero. The device actually contained a second pin that could have stopped the clock and bought Brian more time, but the masterminds deliberately kept him in the dark about it. He had no idea it even existed. And worse yet, the trap was designed to protect itself from the outside. If anyone tried to bypass the maze of red herrings and use a crowbar or hydraulic cutters to snap the iron band off his neck, a hidden anti-tamper switch was waiting. The moment the iron frame shifted, it would complete the circuit and detonate the pipes instantly. And then, of course, there was the walking stick, the crude cane Brian carried into the bank, and that was actually a completely functional homemade shotgun. The FBI lab concluded that while the explosive technology was basic, the custom iron craftsmanship was highly precise. Someone had spent months machining these exact parts in a workshop just for this one afternoon. The ultimate proof of that calculation was waiting inside Brian's car. There, investigators found the scavenger hunt notes, just as he said they would. This was a massive 9-page packet, meticulously written in multicolored ink using a plastic stencil. It addressed Brian coldly as the hostage and laid out the rules for the game. The first stop of the hunt was a milestone marker at a nearby McDonald's. The notes told him to crawl into the flower bed, turn over a stone, and retrieve a small container containing a key and the next clue. But when FBI agents actually mapped out the coordinates of the entire scavenger hunt, they discovered a terrifying truth. The bomb's timer was set to run out in less than an hour, but the physical distance between the bank and the checkpoints was over 20 miles. So even if Brian had broken every speed limit, faced zero traffic, and found every hidden canister instantly, it was mathematically impossible for him to complete the hunt before the time ran out. The scavenger hunt was a total distraction. The masterminds never had any intention of letting Brian Wells live. He was a walking dead man the second that device was secured.
The question on everyone's mind now was, who created the bomb and why? For 3 weeks, the FBI hits a brick wall. The investigation completely stalls until September 20th, 2003, when the police dispatch receives a bizarre call from a man named William Bill Rothstein. Now, Rothstein is a known character in the area. He's a brilliant but deeply eccentric local handyman and craftsman who speaks fluent French, possesses a genius-level IQ, and lives in a messy house right next to a giant television transmission tower. And if that location sounds familiar, it's because that transmission tower is the exact spot where Brian Wells delivered his final pizza order. Rothstein tells the dispatcher, "You need to send agents to my house right now. I have a frozen body in my garage freezer and I can't live with it anymore." Now, when police arrive, they find exactly what he described. Inside a chest freezer in Rothstein's garage is the frozen, wrapped body of a man named James Roden. The police immediately pull Rothstein in for questioning. Sitting in the interrogation room, he quickly points the finger saying, "Look, I didn't kill him. Marjorie Deal Armstrong did. She shot him over a money dispute, and she forced me to use my tools to help her hide the body. And this is where the puzzle pieces violently slam together. Marjorie Deal Armstrong was Rothstein's ex-fiancée, and Marjorie is a local legend in Erie for all the wrong reasons. She was once a stunning, brilliantly intelligent woman with a master's degree, but over the decades she suffered from severe untreated bipolar disorder and paranoia. And she had a body count. Years earlier in 1984, Marjorie was put on trial for killing her boyfriend, Robert Thomas, after shooting him 6 times. But at trial, she claimed self-defense and was somehow acquitted. Then, a few years later, another boyfriend died mysteriously of a head injury. Now, a third boyfriend, James Roden, ends up frozen in a garage next to the pizza delivery site. The FBI realizes this couldn't be a coincidence. They deep dive into Marjorie and Rothstein's circle, and they uncover a motive so absurdly petty it makes your stomach turn. Marjorie's father was a wealthy local man who possessed a multi-million-dollar estate. Marjorie was deeply paranoid that her father was spending all of his money on friends and vacations, leaving her with no inheritance. She decided she needed to hire a hitman to kill her own father before the money ran out. The cost of her evil hitman plot? $250,000. So, to secure that cash, Marjorie decided to rob a bank. She used her brilliant, obsessive ex-boyfriend Bill Rothstein to construct the flawless, inescapable iron collar bomb. They also looped in a local drug dealer named Kenneth Barnes to help monitor the bank and execute the logistics.
But as the FBI rounded up this bizarre crew of plotters, they were forced to confront the single biggest question of the entire investigation. Where exactly did Brian Wells fit into all of this? Was he just a completely innocent pawn, or was he actively part of the team? After years of chasing down leads and digging into the underworld of Erie, the FBI officially labeled Brian Wells a limited co-conspirator. Their theory was that Brian was struggling heavily with money and happened to run in the same sketchy circles as the drug dealer Kenneth Barnes. The feds believed that Brian willingly agreed to participate in a fake bank robbery under the impression that he'd be wearing a harmless, fake prop bomb around his neck just to scare the bank tellers into handing over the cash. But according to the FBI, when Brian drove up to that remote transmission tower to deliver the pizzas, his co-conspirators completely betrayed him. Bill Rothstein stepped out of the shadows holding the real heavy iron collar. Brian realized it was a live bomb and frantically tried to run, but the men tackled him to the ground, held a gun to his head, and forced the explosive around his neck anyway. In a matter of seconds, he went from thinking he was an actor in a staged heist to realizing he was the sacrificial lamb. However, Brian's family, along with many independent investigators, vehemently reject that theory to this day. They point out that Brian had absolutely zero history of criminal behavior. He loved his simple life with his cats. They argue that during the robbery, his behavior wasn't that of a confident insider. He looked genuinely confused, helpless, and completely terrified. They believe he was blindsided from minute one, used entirely as a disposable shield by a group of absolute psychopaths. And the justice in this case, it turned out to be just as messy and fractured as the plot itself. Bill Rothstein, the master craftsman who actually built the diabolical iron collar bomb, never lived to stand trial for the heist. He died of aggressive cancer in 2004, taking many of the device's secrets to his grave. Meanwhile, Marjorie Deal Armstrong's federal trial in 2010 was an absolute circus. She repeatedly screamed at the judges, fired multiple lawyers, and spent hours delivering rambling, paranoid testimonies from the stand. But the jury saw right through the chaos. She was convicted of armed bank robbery and conspiracy and was sentenced to life in prison, where she eventually passed away from cancer in 2017.
It is a case where sheer brilliance, absolute greed, and severe mental derangement collided to create a public execution. A plot to steal $250,000 that ended with a frozen body, 2 dead masterminds, and a delivery driver dead on a parking lot pavement for less than $9,000. We want to hear from you guys on this one. Drop a comment or message us on social media. Do you think Brian Wiles was a victim of the ultimate ambush, or do you think he let himself get talked into a scheme that turned into his worst nightmare? Let us know your theories. Thank you for listening to another episode of Unalived Weekly. We will see you again next week.